agenda for the February 4th working session of the Bloomfield Hills Board of Education. Secretary, take attendance.
All right, at the meeting, Paul Colin, Jackie El-Sayed, Howard Barron, Jennifer Cook, myself, Lisa Eprose, and Rob Estes.
Okay, the first thing on the agenda is our public comment. And I have blue cards, and if anyone who has not submitted a blue card, please submit the blue cards to the lady at the desk who will give them to me. I'm going to go in order. There's a 5-minute time limit for public comment. And we will start with Steve Gottlieb.
Thank you.
You can stand, sit.
Stand, sit?
Yeah,
Okay. I'm used to a little private, personal things. So, first, I want to thank you guys for inviting me to speak to your board. I'm a school board member in Troy. I'm running for the open position for Region 8 for the MASB. And I thought that I sent out emails to everyone that gave my contact information, and I wanted to share with you that I thought, well, if I stop by and do an invite, just have an opportunity to introduce myself, meet you all, and let you know that I really think MASB has done a great job. It's done a wonderful job. So my running for that position is not to write something or to correct something. What it is to enhance what I think we will all benefit from, and that is to give us a voice both on a state and federal level that I think is needed. There's some challenges I see currently and future coming down the road that if we don't collectively work together to deal with, it's not going to be good for anyone. So that said, specifically I sent an email to all of you, and that email addressed some of the concerns that I thought, you know, we collectively have all had the opportunity to attend some of their education programs, and they've been, for the general consensus, is very good, and my goal would be to build on that and to enhance that and improve that programming so that all of us could benefit from some of the great programs that have been there and some that that have an opportunity to have some improvement. So that said, also I wanted to come to you and ask, should I receive the votes necessary to get on that board? I was curious to know if there were areas that you felt you'd like to have input and a voice in. So with that, tell me, is there?
This is
part of public comment.
This is not a dialogue, but we will get, we have your email, and if we have, any specific things, I'll reach out to you.
I have not gotten a copy of the email, so if we can circulate it around, that would be great.
All right, yeah, and realizing it's not a dialogue, just a public comment. It's just by way of introduction, but I did send a personal email to everyone, so don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank
All right, you bet.
Thank you. Howard, will you take the time? I didn't mention that to you. Take
okay.
A public comment.
I can do that.
Yeah, I was getting started here.
Yep. Okay. There it is.
Taking your beautiful.
Perfect. Oh,
So,
that was professional.
Our second public comment is Steve Esrich.
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 So again, please don't take this personally. My frustrations are focused elsewhere. But I've been appealing to the IA's Joint Steering Committee, the ones who will be defending the IA and QIA perhaps today, the BH administration, and finally this board for over 2 years. Over that time, BH has received 4 to 6 other letters of complaints. For at least 1.5 years, BH has been in the possession of a letter corroborating almost all of my claims, and they never responded nor made them public. Furthermore, when I wrote to the board again this week with the name of a witness to IA administration concerns, within 2 hours, Lynn Gibson called that witness to probe. No wonder that so many people are afraid to come forward. How can this possibly be considered ethical? I guess I better just try to get as much on the record now as possible and hope the public will disinfect this mess. I implore the community to demand the release of all correspondence concerning the QIA. I'm sure my credibility will be attacked at some point, so let's start there. After strenuously complaining to OCMA about continuing unethical practices at QIA, I believe a retroactive case for termination with cause was constructed against me to evade paying me owed compensation and severance. These are excerpts from the International School Review's posts on OCMA. Hired staff under false pretenses. Director is more than willing to make promises that he knows the school ownership can't or won't keep. Lambert Okma will no doubt continue operations without any standard of ethics or morality. He is a casual liar who will say anything only to forget or deny it later. The entire Western staff thoroughly distrusts anything he says and views him as a man of absolutely no integrity and a ruthless opportunist. Specific to my termination, this is, in here, there is a letter by activity chaperone Damian Probert. Quote, "These were all lies to try to get him dismissed. I then heard the Chinese staff were really being pressured to say something against Mr. Eshik as they feared for their jobs." In a long letter from Ambrose Lovely in here, besides referencing various frauds, a hostile workplace, threats, a teacher strike, a government prohibition on marketing, he says, "I think I understand malice, like when a company repeatedly browbeats vulnerable employees until they sign statements which misrepresent their own words for the purpose of assassinating the character of an employee who dares to protest the management's unethical practice." There's also a letter from one of those very employees who told me that she was terrorized to complain many months after the fact about me teaching her the European cheek greeting, cheek greeting kiss, and joking in text. Her response was, "Come on, we are friends. I never felt any uncomfortable about your playfulness. And offend? Oh no, of course, no, you are a good friend." Most damning, this is part of a letter from Travis Coverdell over here, which the district has kept secret for 1.5 years, in which he confirms almost everything I've claimed. After describing the panic at QIA over mass firings to reduce overhead for the new investor, he says, "Mr. Eschrich's situation is very strange, as Mr. Okma first indicated to me in October that he was being bought out of his contract as his salary was too expensive. Then, once discussions began with the new investor, I was notified that Mr. Okma was wanting to gather information to terminate Mr. Eschrich for cause. It came as a great shock. He was trying to create reasons to terminate him and not pay him his severance. At our final meeting, Mr. Okma told Mr. Eschrich that if he didn't sign the dramatically reduced severance agreement, not only will you not get a letter of recommendation, but you will be finished in education. I was appalled by this threat." This is from Okma's own emails to Travis Coverdell 5 days after my buyout termination meeting. "We need precise incidents to substantiate. I will make notes on my observations and responses at QIA to Steve in regard to sexual-related comments or touching." And these don't even begin to address that a couple of Chinese staff, I believe, were so ruthlessly ambitious that they would willingly lie, especially at the order of that amoral slob Michael Yu and Lambert Okma, to advance themselves. This is from an old parting letter to IA colleagues by a teacher who had been apparently falsely perceived as having had collegial problems. Union reps, quote, "asked Bert if he intended to put the document in my file, to which he responded yes. Then they asked him to consider revising the document, and Bert responded by asking why. They said, because there are clearly inaccuracies, I believe utter fabrications, to which he responded, and I quote, "It doesn't have to be accurate to go in her file." Just before he left the IA, Okma had to face a huge crowd of irate parents and students out at West when he terminated another popular teacher for supposed collegiality issues again. And while we're thinking about the IA itself, taxpayers should FOIA BH records for 2002 to 2004 to see if the district had to pay settlements for unjust terminations at the International Academy. And while you're...
Time's up.
Time? Okay.
Time's up. Next public comment is Joseph Cesar.
My name is Joseph Kasser, and
Kasser,
I'm
sorry.
a township resident. I'd like to concede my time to Steve at this point.
That's not allowed, sir.
I'm gonna make an exception.
Okay.
Exception.
Okay.
Give us 5 minutes.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Also, FOIA records for 2006 to 2010 to see if the district paid for both administrators to be out of school at the same time to travel to India on previous sister school profiteering junkets or to attend crucial IB conferences together. But back to the QIA. There's also a letter in here from Jessica Liang, marketing director, tormented by Okma's unconscionable deceit of her friend to get her to quit her current job before signing a grossly misrepresented contract. And when she complained, he simply rescinded the offer. I quote now, "I heard that what you are trying to do in the U.S. to show people the truth about the real situation of QIA in China. I'm glad there are some brave people like you who has the courage to stand out and speak out, because I know it needs lots of brave and sometimes it costs you a lot. This fine lady did not sign the contract at the first time because the contract shown to her is different as what she'd be told in her interview. I think they might change some contract details. I know it's unbelievable, but it does real happen when she be told she got the offer. So she quit from her original job, but just before she comes, they just changed their mind so easily and told her they don't want her anymore. I still can't believe Bert did that to her. This makes me feel so shame. I never meet a company or school did like this. They just break their offer and promise so easily. But also those poor students and parents, I have to give them promise every day and then try to explain my best to explain to them why the promise has to be broken and give them another promise that only God knows it can become real. We be told different stories every day and we never know when the real answer will come. The school license, the land, the school facilities, financial issues, the IB license, we never know the truth. I am glad I quit, so I don't need to stay in lies anymore. See a pattern here? Regarding licensing and pressure to lie to the government, at least 5 people have alerted BH to QIA's illicit license and or pressure to lie to government officials concerning it. Here is a copy of the license noting our address in Gmo, a city that's more than an hour away from our school. There's also a statement in here by Sebastian Daniels, including a QIA document to government claiming he was only paid a little less than $700 a month, along with his contract showing that he was really paid $4,000 a month. It would not surprise me if Okma's scoundrel partner has either fabricated false verification of the QIA's good license or perhaps even bribed or extorted a government official to retroactively generate supporting documentation. But ask yourself, why would 5 different people make up a story and grieve to Bloomfield? Regarding racial discrimination, despite its policies to the contrary, the QIA routinely discriminated against Chinese employees, paying foreign teachers several times as much for similar work. Is Bloomfield concerned about that? Regarding safety protocols, the only fire escape, chained clothes, no water hooked up to the fire hose, mandatory use of asbestos. Do any of these things concern the board? And it is absolutely untrue that the asbestos repair that was reported before was in a remote part of the school. Students passed within that site 6 to 8 times a day. There's simply no time to get into all the unethical practices here. I've been told that so much staff meeting time at the IA was devoted to the QIA that there wasn't enough time to address regular school business. Almost all our major policy documents were adaptations of IA documents provided by Lynn Gibson, many created by IA teachers. Did the Joint Steering Committee really authorize free use of IA teachers' time and resources for profiteering? I still don't know if Bloomfield can be held legally liable for its gross dereliction of oversight responsibilities and subsequent cover-up, but I hope the community holds itself to a higher standard and forces the district to accept moral responsibility. Everyone who was harmed in this shameful venture should be made whole. In my opinion, and those of most teachers at the QIA, Lambert Okma is an utterly unprincipled man, opportunistically risking the IA's reputation, essentially selling scarce seats at the IA for personal profit. Thank goodness his wife can provide fair, objective, diligent, quality assurance that the district demands. To suggest there's no conflict of interest when her husband stands to personally profit from her actions is simply ludicrous. I believe this district should permanently sever all ties with Lambert Okma and remove his name from Central's campus. I believe that Rob Glass has been totally complicit in this cover-up after learning all the corroborating evidence to my claim. He needs to resign as well. Remember Edmund Burke's ominous warning: the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. Thanks.
Victoria Cesar.
Hello, my name is Victoria Kessler, and I'm an IA alum from the class of 2010. I'm here today to speak about the positive impact Mr. E had during my high school years, in addition to his active role in the IA community and beyond. I've known Mr. E for close to 20 years. Him and my dad coached my soccer team from kindergarten through 5th grade. I was late starting at the IA due to being on the lottery wait list. It was really overwhelming starting high school late, but it was comforting having a familiar face in my econ class. Mr. E was a great teacher and regularly integrated life lessons while simultaneously teaching us about economic theory and current events. As an impressionable high schooler, it was great to have such an incredible role model. During my time at the IA, there were rumors of non-ethical behavior and relationships among the faculty. This was a questionable time for me and my classmates. Through it all, Mr. E demonstrated the importance of hard work, self-worth, and integrity. Mr. E was steadfast in his guidance and direction during this time and only spoke positively and respectfully, a breath of fresh air amidst the gossip. Mr. E was also one of the most active teachers amongst the IA faculty. He was very involved in the enrichment program and led the annual scuba diving certification trips to Ohio. I was also fortunate to go to Alaska as one of my enrichments, which was led by Mr. E. Traveling with about 20 high school students was no small feat. Mr. E genuinely was concerned about our academic experience, our growth as high school students, and the enriching curriculum that the IA offered. I was disappointed to hear about the experience that Mr. E had in China, as his main objective has always been student-centered. Since graduating IA, I've received a bachelor's in science, a bachelor's in health science, as well as my doctorate in physical therapy, and I know that many of my classmates have been successful in their own academic and professional endeavors. I believe that this was achieved through our rigorous education at the International Academy. However, I also believe that this was accomplished due to the guidance and support of a man who has always pushed us to be our very best academically and, more importantly, contributing adults to our community and beyond. Thank you.
Nicole Valdeverio.
Hi, my name is Nicole Valdivieso. I am an IA graduate from 2013, and I just wanted to read an email that I sent to Ms. Gibson a few days ago. Dear Ms. Gibson, I hope this email finds you well. My name is Nicole Valdivieso, and I'm a 2013 IA graduate. I'm writing to you directly per Ms. Miner's suggestion on Facebook. As stated in her post, it is correct that IA taught us to evaluate any situation from multiple perspectives. With that in mind, I am reaching out to you on behalf of many concerned students and members of the IA community. I'd like to share with you a petition that was created. This petition outlines, in part, the apparent controversy surrounding the QIA project. Both the legitimacy and licensing of the IA sister school in China have been called into question, as well as concerns regarding contract/staffing, retaliatory behavior, and lack of transparency with the project. As an IA grad who cares deeply about the school and what it stands for, I'm invested in being able to appropriately assess the situation. If there's any information you or any others would be able to provide in response, it would be greatly appreciated. I know it is troubling both to myself and to many other members of the IA community to think we might not have the entire story. In order to help assuage the community's unease, I'd like to share any further information publicly. I trust you appreciate our concern regarding this issue. Please feel free to share this email with any other IA administrators or involved parties. Shortly before arriving here, I received a response from Ms. Gibson. She says, "Dear Nicole, thank you for your interest and request to gather information regarding the other side of this story. At this point, I've been advised by my superiors to not engage in a back and forth dialogue in regard to these accusations. I do, however, appreciate your desire to learn more and your commitment to the International Academy." Below is an email Dr. Glass and Paul Colin, president of the Bloomfield Hills School Board, recently sent. In the near future, there will be a more formal and public response presented to Dr. Glass and the school board. I hope we remain patient as the facts unfold. As they become public, I will be happy to share them with you. As you may be aware, a recent petition has been posted on change.org calling for Principal Lynn Gibson to step down due to allegations in connection with the International Academy's relationship with the International Academy in Qingdao, China. Whenever negative attention is focused on a school or its personnel, it becomes justifiably concerning to all of us. Please share this message with anyone who raises questions and/or concerns. As a fiscal agent of the IA Consortium, we are working to craft a fact-based response to the allegations. The IA initiated a sister school relationship with QIA in 2014. No public school expenses were incurred in creating or operating the school, or when a team of administrators from consortium districts visited the IA on a quality assurance visit. The QIA did not thrive and is now closed. As a fiscal agent, we're reviewing several documents, and our legal counsel is looking into recent allegations, many of which are duplicates of past allegations, which were found by our attorney to be unsubstantiated. Accordingly, the consortium remains committed to accurately understanding any new information that may be brought to its attention, but it's crucial to keep in mind that until all information is reviewed, We need to focus on educating our students and not let this deter our commitment. I'd just like to say that I appreciate the intent to be transparent, but from what I'm hearing, it just seems that there's a lot of information that isn't being shared. And my concern, as well as many others, is that even in an attempt to reach out and hear the other side, as we were encouraged to do, we're not really receiving any kind of response about these allegations. Thank you.
Nikhil?
All right, so I was under the impression I'd have 10 minutes to speak, but apparently I only have 5, so I'll have to cut out a lot of my speech. I'll just read the beginning, summarize the middle, and then go straight to the end. All right, good evening. My name is Nikhil Vibhashyam, and I graduated from the International Academy last year. I'm here to bring you my personal experiences with Lynn Gibson and her administration, specifically regarding how the Gibson administration suppressed a popular student reform movement during my senior year, violating students' freedom of speech and making students feel unsafe criticizing administrative policies. At the beginning of my narrative, as I describe the movement, it might be hard to see what this all has to do with Lynn Gibson, but it will become much clearer later on. To begin my summary, as I'm sure most of you know, the International Academy is an extremely challenging school for most students, much more so than most other public high schools. Students are routinely burdened with literally hours of homework in addition to their extracurriculars. It's entirely unremarkable for IA students to spend their entire waking day from 6 in the morning to 2 in the night purely on school-related activities without any room for free time. As a result of this overwork, there has for several years been a massive, widespread, yet largely unacknowledged mental illness epidemic at the International Academy. I'm sure many of you aren't even aware of it, in my opinion, because Lynn Gibson's administration has done a pretty good job hiding it. There's some solid evidence to back up my claims of a severe mental health crisis. Estimating based on conversations with my classmates, there were at least 8 suicide attempts by IA students in the past 2 years, as well as an actual suicide. Many of my own friends routinely talked about how the unnecessary amount of coursework caused them to be depressed and to have suicidal thoughts. Indeed, these anecdotes are empirically backed up by a survey conducted in January 2018, demonstrating that 61%, a solid majority, out of 127 IA seniors who answered the survey, had had suicidal thoughts in the past 2 years. In December 2017, the student body finally came to the consensus that something needed to change. If the Gibson administration and the teachers would continue to do almost nothing meaningful to help solve the overwork and the mental health crisis, as they've been doing for years, then it was up to us to create that change. So we started a movement for that purpose, known as the Union of Students of the International Academy. From here, I'm just going to summarize the rest of my speech. One of the first things we did was conduct a survey of the seniors that found, that's a source of the 61% statistic. We also found 68% of seniors felt stressed, depressed, and anxious, and out of 81 seniors who regularly missed school, 80% did so because they were exhausted from schoolwork or because they were overwhelmed. Based on these statistics and based on suggestions submitted by tens of seniors, we created a document, primarily written by me, entitled Resolution from Seniors to the Administration on Stress and Mental Health Issues. This 9-page document described many of students' grievances with the way that things were being run and proposed solutions to these problems. In total, we received 370 signatures just from Central and West campuses on this document. It seemingly never made it to East Campus, that's why we don't have any from there. This is the part where Lynn Gibson comes in. Despite the popularity of the movement and the resolution, the administration viewed the document with fierce condemnation. Soon after the resolution went public, Lynn Gibson led a PTIA meeting in which she enlisted some teachers and a few seniors who vehemently opposed the resolution to speak out against it, making, really patent lies against the resolution, claiming that it was attacking the teachers, creating mental health problems for teachers. After this, let's see. Yeah, so then I suspect that she more or less gave teachers explicit approval to criticize the resolution in their classes. Teachers began saying things like there will be consequences for signing the resolution, and supporting it could mean making our student-teacher relationship bitter, statements that are unequivocally threats. In fact, yeah, I'll skip over that part. And as Matthew Mancini will mention, I think he's 2 speakers after me, there was a meeting in December 2017 between students and the administration. The administration had promised to follow up on this meeting, but kept stalling it. Finally, I suspect because of public pressure as a result of the resolution, there was another meeting that they scheduled in February. During this meeting, Lynn Gibson seemingly went out of her way to give students as little power as possible. She constantly cut off students who tried to discuss solutions to the mental health problems. Let's see. Yeah, I forgot. One of the most important part was before the meeting. Christopher Smith, the associate principal at Central, was very much complicit in all of this. He actually called my mother and told her a one-sided story about how her son had gone rogue, writing a document insulting all of his teachers. My parents, who fit well into the stereotype of the strict Indian parent, they were absolutely shocked by this story. I experienced several repercussions. And I can't help but think that Christopher Smith knew exactly what he was doing when he said that. I'm going to skip to the end of my speech now. At the end of it all, the student movement amounted to nothing, and the fault lies entirely with the actions of the Gibson administration. I'd be entirely unsurprised if, at the rate that things are currently going, there are a few more suicide attempts at the IA in the next 2 years. In fact, I'd be surprised if there aren't. All in all, I think it's quite clear from my experiences and those given by others that the autocratic Gibson administration is in urgent need of replacement, starting with Lynn Gibson herself, and preferably leading subsequently to removal of tyrannical Napoleons like Christopher Smith. Given the alarmingly high level of suicidal ideation going on at the IA, I argue further that we're dealing with a life and death situation. I implore you to act as soon as possible on this matter. Also, I have a copy of the resolution, multiple, for anyone who wants to read it.
Mr. Balasam, if you want to submit the speech, it can be made part of the minutes.
Yeah, I have.
So the parts that you didn't get to cover will be reflected in the minutes for the public.
Should I just give it
Just
to
give it to
Yeah.
me.
Okay, yeah.
I submitted that as evidence also, right?
Oh, this is, okay.
Amelia, start.
Since I'm way in the back, I'll walk to the front as well. Good evening, everybody. I am tonight going to enter some more information into the minutes. My intent is to give some documents to anybody who's interested so that they can have primary sources to take a look and decide, make up their own minds about this situation. First thing I'm going to enter in is a Freedom of Information Act request that a group of community members and former employees of the China IA LLC, we submitted it to Rob Glass this week. It was basically after we became aware of the email that one of the earlier speakers read that kind of indicates that there's no conflict of interest and no major problem. We said, well, we have to respond with some requests for detailed information. So I'm going to submit it to the minutes, and I'll just put it down here for a moment, with the invitation that anyone else who is interested, maybe colleagues in the journalism business, can tag along. And I also want to mention that we are requesting that you not charge for this information that we have requested, because the meetings of the Joint Steering Committee and the minutes and other were illegally closed for many years, and so there was no public opportunity to raise questions in that forum. I also want to, you have a really complex policy document that's attached to your website. And there are several places in that document where you address conflicts of interest, including the form that Lynn Gibson completed. And I have just, I hope I haven't made a mistake. If I have, please correct it. But I pulled out the sections of the policy that seem to address conflict of interest, and there are several. And I want to point out that although the form that Lynn Gibson filled out does not ask about conflicts of interest beyond relationships with suppliers, there are other portions of these conflict policies that do seem to to address more directly this kind of situation, a profit orientation with a different kind of relationship than with a supplier. And I am questioning if any of these other portions of the conflict of interest policies might apply here, and ask that you take a look at that. We do have a really close relationship between Lynn Gibson and the QIA, last time we were here on the 17th, introduced into the minutes a statement by Travis Coverdell, whose name has come up again here. I want to now introduce his employment contract with China IA LLC into the minutes. And I just want to note that the address given for China IA LLC appears to be the same as the home address of both Lynn Gibson and Bert Oakma, who are married. And then I mentioned last time that there are other China partner schools that are under discussion, at least, connected with the IA. And so here's some information about those. There is a school, it appears to be under construction, or maybe it's already constructed in Chongqing. It was originally called the Chongqing Okma International Academy. There was some stories about a contract being signed for this school. You'll see some IA administrators at this contract signing ceremony in 2015. Many pictures. There were some news stories in the media around the time that this, in China and here, around the time of this contract signing ceremony, so I'm just entering those into the minutes. And then just this last summer in 2018, it appears that Bert Okma and Lynn Gibson and several other administrators, including one from the IA of Macomb, the principal there, made a trip to China, and they were discussing, according to this information in Chinese media, potential partner schools and the construction or creation of a partner school in Shenzhen, China, a different city, so that's a third city. And they also had some meetings in Shanghai. Appears to be no specific school plan there, but I just want to say that this is a kind of an ongoing issue, and I hope you're developing some policies related to partner schools and what would be the best approach to them. I know that okay, so very quickly, Nikhil introduced the resolution into the minutes. I have some copies of emails that Lynn Gibson sent out related to this, so in the interest of providing people with her side of that story, I want to introduce them. And I also have an email exchange here regarding a parent effort to raise money for in support of student mental health at the International Academy, and that effort was not, never came to fruition because there were never any suggestions about how to move forward with that once the initial thought about renovating the building to create a counseling center was found to be inoperable. So hopefully that can move forward in the future. Thank you.
Matthew?
There's an extra chair up here if anyone needs it.
Just give that to her so she could record it. You can begin.
Hello, esteemed board members. My name is Matthew Mancini, and I am a student at Michigan State University. I graduated from International Academy last year in 2018, and I came here today to speak about my experiences at IA as well as my interactions with IA's administration. More notably, I came here to reveal to the board that the large portion of the IA student body suffers from mental illness, and how my attempts to aid their struggles were derailed and ultimately swept under the rug by the administration. When I was still in high school, prioritizing one's mental health and talking about a subject that is very taboo in our day and age was not a major concern for many IA students. Now, IA, as we all know, is very academically rigorous. The IB in and of itself is a very arduous program, but some teachers at IA would take it to the next level. The massive workload took a toll on the student body. It wasn't uncommon for someone to have a mental breakdown over a late assignment or sob in the middle of class because they hadn't slept in 3 days. We would often make suicide jokes or complain how we might as well eat the bullet if we don't score 90% on the upcoming bio exam. Now at IA, I would frequently had conversations with my classmates about how a large amount of us suffered from mental illness. Now that didn't come as a surprise because I read in the Psychology Today article that people with higher IQs are more susceptible to mental illness. So a school full of remarkably intelligent and creative people was basically the watering hole for mental illnesses. Being surrounded by a bunch of people going through the same experiences may be comforting to some, but for others it is constant perpetuation of their pre-existing condition. Now one example would be something that we call twisted bragging rights, where we try to outdo each other with things that shouldn't be bragged about, such as getting who got the least amount of sleep that night, or who has the most depressing life at this moment. Now these types of things foster a very toxic environment. Now, at one point I was very fed up with this, and on December 7th, 2017, I sent an email to the senior class urging everyone to make a change for the upcoming generation. Now, along with this email, I also encouraged the students to voice their concerns and problems they had with IA. Now, afterwards, I ended up emailing the vice principal, which I would just call VP from now on, And we contacted him on December 8th, and we tried to schedule a meeting. He ended up contacting Gibson. We ended up scheduling a meeting for December 14th. And on December 14th, yes. So we ended up talking about how we were sick and tired of the toxic environment and wanted things to change. Now, both administrators seemed very surprised about this whole situation, and we gave some details about the toxicity and about how it was very academically competitive. And Gibson acted very condescending throughout the whole meeting and kept on diverting the idea away. And at one point, she even revealed that not one student from her campus had actually failed out of IA, which is kind of like, it was kind of astonishing, because that's every IA kid's nightmare. But as it turns out, I actually know 4 people personally that left because they missed a large portion of school from their mental disorder. And instead of accommodating these students' mental disorders and allowing them to catch up, they were forced to leave. Now, Gibson also mentioned that she was working with the IB to launch an investigation about the mental illnesses, but there was no facts to base this up. And at the end of the meeting, we ended up not scheduling an interview, and it basically continued, as Nicole said, that we continued this constant, struggle for trying to schedule something until finally on January 11th, we ended up releasing the resolution, and there was rumors that, began to spread regarding the resolution. Nicole and I fell under a ton of scrutiny for the whole writing of the resolution, and were seen as rebel rousers. Both of us had a fairly good reputation prior to the movement, and were both leaders of clubs and received good grades. We were never considered delinquents in any sense of the word, but the resolution changed that. Teachers began calling the resolution a manifesto, and the document reached across all 3 campuses, or 2, according to Nicole. I didn't know it didn't go to East. And after a teacher meeting on January 22nd, VP and Gibson advised teachers to disregard all mention of the resolution and offered teachers the ability to walk out the teacher's student meeting if the resolution was even mentioned. Now, that exhibits a clear violation of our right to freedom of speech and is very illegal. Now, the next day, teachers began threatening students and said that if there were consequences for our actions. I'll just skip it to. So January 30th, there were 2 things that happened. One thing was the tweet that one student let out, and they ended up bringing that student to their office, and they ended up forcing him to take down the tweet, which is, again, a violation of your right for speech. But then that night, a letter was sent out to parents from Gibson, and she referred to the resolution as a petition that included inaccurate information about the school and was communicated in a manner that did not reflect our IB commitment to open-mindedness and source bias. Then went on to mock the petition by saying that she used it as a teaching tool. First, she never taught us anything because we didn't meet with her besides that one time in December. Second,
wrap it up.
Yeah. And second, she shouldn't accuse us of being decisive when this is obvious ploy to divide and conquer. Now finally, discrediting students to win the hearts of parents is kind of pathetic. And she then tried to boast about IA's strides towards mental health awareness but there were only 4 accounts of mental health awareness that were throughout the school. One was during my junior year, which was they decorated a bulletin board. The second one was we meditated for 15 minutes in one of my Spanish classes. The third one was that they handed out a flyer. And the fourth one was a seminar where basically we watched a trailer for a new movie called Angst, and we learned about the consequences of vaping. And they also dramatized a video about a depressed person and basically made it look like a sinister disease. Now, just to note, these last 3 times were also within a month and a half of whenever I revealed this whole thing. So they only took strides towards mental illness right after I made it relevant. So this whole fiasco came to a climax on February 6th when we had a meeting with teachers. Now, the meeting was dictated by Gibson, and she basically ignored all of our opinions, and afterwards there were no actual solutions towards it. They basically just recognized all the problems which we had done before, the students had done before, and it was essentially rendered useless because afterwards there was no solutions to the problem. Now, I urge the boards to at least look into the matter. Gibson has done some terrible things during her tenure as principal, and she clearly doesn't prioritize the mental health of IA students, and she never showed that she cared about us. I hope that you make the right decision and see that Ling Gibson never sets foot in the place of education again. Thank you.
Is there any more cards? Yeah, Mark's.
Thank you. My name is Jim Bry. I'm IA West PTI president, and I have been so for the past 7.5 years. I have 2 graduates from IA West. They're at Michigan and Michigan State, and I have a junior there as well. I am kind of the organizational memory for the IA. There have been multiple PTI meetings across all 3 campuses for many years, and we've coordinated tri-campus events and things like that, so I'm well aware of what goes on across all the campuses. There's a couple things I'd like to talk about. When I first came to the IA, which was in 2010, I was asked to fundraise for PI, which stands for Partners in Education. And I've been managing 501c3 accounts since elementary school when I was PTA president for there, and then middle school and so forth. And so the first question out of my mouth was, well, what does PI do? Because I have no idea what that means. Partners in Education. I don't know what that is. And I was told that's not really my concern. That, you know, this is a pile of money that we use to forward the ideals of the International Academy. Frankly, that wasn't enough for me, so we all declined to fundraise for PI. Everyone on the PTIA took that vote, and we said no. When we did the Tri-Campus Gala many years back, which was supposed to raise money for all the science equipment that was needed by the new curriculum for the IA, and we can discuss why parents have to raise money for lab equipment for the curriculum at the IA, but that's another story. But we took that on as a task, and we raised more than $45,000 amongst all 3 campuses to do that, and we split it evenly amongst the campuses in a make-it-take-it mentality, which was very, very good. We were asked at that time to put that money into the International Academy Foundation and have that money managed out of there. All 3 campuses, all PTAs, all 50 people involved sat down and said, what is the International Foundation? We don't know what that is. Where does that money go? We were told, that's not our concern. It's just the money that we use to forward the events of the International Academy. So therefore, we manage that money ourselves. And we spent and wrote checks to all the science companies that we're buying equipment from for ourselves. A lack of transparency, this should not be the case in a public school. I publish my books every single month for the first 10 minutes of every PTIE meeting of what I take in, what I spent. Every expense has 2 other people sign it who are not involved in the expense. And my books are audited every year by a CPA who is a 501c3 person. Fortunately, she has students at the school, and she's been doing this for many, many years, even though her kids have graduated a long time ago. But this is the level of rigor that I choose to go to, primarily because I'm scared of the IRS. I don't want to be dragged through the mud by anybody. So we go through that level of rigor. I don't get that sense that that's what's gone on here. And I'm very concerned about it because I know that there had to have been quite a bit of money in those accounts because you're talking about the number of students who pay their $150 book fee who just forfeit that at the end of, and don't ask for it back. This is thousands of students over many, many years that's gone into this account. And now I'm told that there's almost nothing in there and it's being closed down. I would ask you, please share those books. Is this not a public institution? What is that money? Where did it go? The level of transparency here is non-existent, and I find that appalling. In so much that, I mean, I could go on for a long time about stories about Lynn Gibson and other things, and I choose not to. I understand that her job is very, very difficult. There was a suicide that was mentioned. That was at West Campus. Okay, the student was a very good friend of mine, very good friend of my daughter's. 3 months went by. There was nothing that was ever said by the administration about anything. After 3 months, the students started to heal on their own. And that's when the administration stepped forward and brought in a counselor. And they all went into the Center for Performing Arts and sat down, and the counselor schooled them on the fact that they were all bullies and that they should not have bullied this student. And if they had not bullied the student, then the student probably wouldn't have committed suicide. That was a complete lack of understanding to have brought in an outsider who knew nothing about the culture at West Campus. And I will tell you now that Central, West, and East are completely different campuses, culturally, and the way that they act with each other, the way that they treat each other, and the fact that West is actually embedded into another high school, so it also has that persona as well. But to walk into a campus for which this student was beloved, well known by everybody, but he committed suicide, and his reasons are his reasons. We can never go back and figure that out. But to then bring in a counselor months after the event and then try to suggest that the culture was toxic amongst the students was ludicrous. And students left that meeting crying. The wounds that were healing were now just opened back up and then thrust upon them. That's a complete lack of understanding by the administration. And I will tell you that West does not get a lot from Central. We don't get a lot of attention. They don't come there often, which is actually turns out to be a fairly good thing, in my opinion. because we get to do things more so than the other campuses. We do a lot more events with the students, and we are in the school more often, and that's a good thing. So if you're really curious about going down this path and talking about this, I can go on for more than an hour, and I have on multiple occasions with other parents, the Huron Valley School Board, and times that I've talked about these things. This amount of time isn't enough to really scratch the surface, and you're going to get a lot of anecdotal information. If you really want to investigate stuff, let's talk. I thank you for your time.
Stephanie Craig.
Good evening. My name is Stephanie Kreider. Many of you already know me. I've expressed my concerns numerous times. I'm here tonight, obviously, in support of all of the IA community in terms of the situation with the sister school in China. But I wanted to really articulate my feeling looking broadly in terms of the implications for Bloomfield Hills School District as a whole. As you know, I've been an advocate for, I primarily talk about parents. For the first time, I'm going to say tonight that I have also been an advocate for staff, for employees in this district. There are paid employees who have contacted me and asked me to speak on their behalf in the schools that my children have attended. Why? Because we have a culture that retaliates against teachers, not just against students, not just against parents, but also against the people whom you employ. And for me, I knew that when someone works for an organization, it's a very difficult place to be in, to bring forth ideas, suggestions, concerns, complaints, when you know someone's going to come back and retaliate. What does that look like? I was a part of a community partnership committee years ago. We had a teacher who came to a meeting, expressed that we had some inequities across the district, and when that teacher got back to her building, our former assistant superintendent contacted that building, that teacher, and it was basically like, we have to do damage control at this point. There are people who have been approached for numerous years when they try to bring forth the culture that exists, whether it's at the IA or in other buildings. They are retaliated against, they are shut down, and what happens is that the complaints, the problems, never get resolved because we're too busy being in the mode of damage control. I have personally spoken to members of the administration, current and past. I have spoken to members of the Board of Education, current and past. I was blatantly told by one of the former board presidents of the Bloomfield Hills School District that she would not allow complaints to come forth in public. Her concern was more about protecting the reputation of the district, which frankly I just find that it's almost comedic in a way, because it's not like people don't know problems exist. So the more it's covered up and the more we don't want to talk about it, it really just makes the problems worse. And that's why you see so many frustrated people, and the crowd keeps growing every time you give people an opportunity to speak, because they've been waiting for so many years to be able to talk about what they've been going through, and no one's been willing to listen. I'm going to be the first to thank you guys tonight, because I personally am optimistic in knowing that we have a shift taking place in the culture here. I believe that we have people sitting at this table who are decent people, who have integrity, who are going to listen, who are going to take action, who are not going to sweep it under the rug anymore. And that's not just for our students, not just for the parents, but I'm asking you, I'm pleading you, I'm begging you to make it known to the staff as well, even current staff at the IA. If you have information, please come forward. You can remain anonymous, it will be confidential, but we're conducting an investigation and we need to know everything that you know. And I would ask that you would do that for every single building in this district. I pulled my 11th grader out last year because when I brought forth concerns about teachers who are harming students emotionally, psychologically, because of the intentional acts that they are committing in the classroom, there was no sense of urgency. And I'm a parent who is at everything. I have sacrificed my time, my business, my finances, everything to try to make things better. And if I'm getting ignored, what do you expect to happen to other people? So I'm simply asking you today that when you look at conflicts of interest, when you look at, all of the allegations that are surrounding this, that you look broadly at the culture of Bloomfield Hills School District, and when you come back to the community, give a response, say how you're going to rectify the problem largely. Not just one single incident, not just one school as if it operates in a silo, but how are we going to correct the culture overall, and what are you going to do for those individuals who continue to resist change and for those people who continue to participate in the cover-up? It's time out, time is up for those individuals. Thank you.
Do we have any more public comment? Thank you everyone who spoke tonight. Me.
I think this card. Is there anyone else that wanted? Oh, do we have other cards?
We can. You can.
Does anyone else want to talk who filled out a card?
Did Nancy Costello talk? No, that's not.
Oh, here we go. Here's your card.
Nancy.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm Nancy Costello. I'm the director of the First Amendment Clinic at Michigan State University. And while there's been a lot of talk from community members about a look at the conflict of interest that involves IA administrators, there may have been documents, for instance, where IA administrators have signed documents concerning conflict of interest, and that might be one element of evidence you look for a conflict of interest. But the other thing is you have to look at the totality of the circumstances here. And I'm here to sort of emphasize that because I'm here to talk about the flagrant violation of the Open Meetings Act that went on for years and years. Under these circumstances, that's where this conflict really comes sort of into sharp relief. The students are talking about mental health concerns that they didn't feel was addressed. Other community members are talking about the affiliation with the China school that they feel wasn't addressed. And they couldn't go to the meetings to even learn about what was going on or even put up their opinions and ask questions about this kind of a thing. Again, I emphasize between 2014 and 2018, in those 5 years, there was 20 meetings. In 18 of those meetings, there was no quorum present at these meetings. At 6 of those meetings, only 6 of the 13 members were present. I should say less than that. 4 or less were present at 6 of these meetings. So the question is, who's making these decisions? If the IA administrators are largely making the decisions, there's no public oversight, there's no public approval, because no one is really attending the meetings to give this public approval. And there's no room for any democratic participation in these meetings, so you can get people to come forward like they are tonight to talk about it. And I think that's why you're seeing such a groundswell of irritation and frustration in your community members. I also want to point out that it appears that there likely was intentional efforts to revise the consortium agreement just to continue the status quo, which would have been, again, another flagrant violation of the Open Meetings Act. The consortium agreement was quite clear that this was a public body. It is the same outline of an agreement that is in the Washtenaw County consortium school districts. They've always had open meetings. And basically, there's rarely been open meetings here in Oakland County. 2 times there was attempts to revise the consortium agreement. Once was in 2014 or 2015, shortly after the First Amendment Clinic asked its first questions about the Open Meetings Act violations. And then again, just this past October, as we began to try to get entrance to meetings. Twice this happened. And the revisions, from my understanding, basically were trying to then make the body just an advisory body to keep the meetings closed, to reflect the status quo of what was going on, so no one could come to the meetings. This suggests to me an intentionality to flagrantly violate the Open Meetings Act, and that's a real problem. Again, looking at the totality of the circumstances of people trying to bring forward their questions about what's going on and the decisions that are being made, major student concerns about mental health, and yet an inability to be heard or to bring it into a public sphere. And I think that's what you have to look at when you think about the conflict of interest here. If it's too much for this body, because it's very close, it's been going on for years, perhaps appointing an independent commission to look at it, to really get down and let's look at all the documents, and no one has a dog in this fight, because this has been going on for so long, right? That there could be real issues of who can look at this independently without having a stake in it. Also, one of the community members has, and I have, through the First Amendment Clinic, have also issued Freedom of Information Act requests. We're being charged money for this, and legally you can do that. It's true. I would also suggest that since it's been more than a decade of closed meetings, when a lot of this information should have been coming out through the meetings or should have been publicly shared with the community, and it hasn't been done, I would suggest that it would be proper to give a waiver on any money it would cost to produce the documents that are being asked for through these FOIA requests. I think that's only just under the circumstances because of what the community has gone through, and they've been shut out for so long from information that otherwise should have been public. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Like I said, for either myself or a member of my team, we'll be getting back to each and every one who filled out and spoke tonight in public comment. With that, we're going to go into our board study session meeting with the first thing on the agenda, student, school, board representative. So the idea is I know as a board, we've talked about in the past having more student voice. I met with some of the representatives from student leadership at the school to have them do an exploratory committee to put together a proposal to come to us later this spring, probably at a April board meeting, going through trying to get some best practices in terms of processes, procedures, and what things are being done out there. I know MASB has had a full-day course. MASB has had a full-day course on this. So there's some research on that. We would feed that to them. They would have some liaisons, some teachers along with the principal of the building work with them in putting together this proposal with various different scenarios to come to us later in the spring, perhaps at an April board meeting. The students would drive that. They were very excited to do this, and I'd like to present to the board for discussion whether or not this exploratory committee should be commissioned by the students to come and propose to us in later this spring in an April board meeting of what their proposal would be. So just that's the.
Paul, is there somebody from the board that would convey what the the idea and responsibilities for the student on a board, what that would entail, so that the students would have some sense of what might be asked of them and what they might be interested in doing?
So I've done a little bit of research. So for instance, Philadelphia right now has 2 students. Last year they went through this whole process. So I had a call with one of the board members in the city of Philadelphia, and they outlined sort of the process. And one of the things they mentioned is that the students put to, after the process itself of selecting, which I would, again, feed that to the student committee as part of their research, the students put together their proposal of what the responsibility would be. And a lot of it, from what they're doing in Philadelphia, would be centered around doing student focus groups, going to the different buildings, reaching out, and they would, sort of be involved in dialogue. They would be a non-voting member, but they would, be at the table discussing, be in the discussion, and they would sort of give, when there were items that were going to be discussed, they would give the student perspective. And their task would be to reach out, not just, they were high school students, not just the high school, if something impacted the whole district, to try to get district feedback from the students through focus groups. And the idea that they shared with me in the city of Philadelphia was that the students felt that this was a good way, their interaction of student voice when they had the focus groups with the student, and not being a board member and not being an administration, they felt the dialogue was very, it was great dialogue that they had. And they were able, and the board member said that their feedback, they gave a different perspective that they probably would have not gotten unless they had a student representative.
Is it appropriate to, I think it's great that we task them with the research and it's their project. Is it appropriate to say, come back to us with an A and a B scenario? I mean, appreciating that there's only a limited menu of things that a student board rep is going to be able to do, that they could maybe craft 2 iterations of it, maybe a less intense versus a more intense, and then we could discuss, you know, and have a choice.
Yeah, that would be the idea. So Principal Charlie would be working with them with their, you know, they have a student leadership class. So the leaders of that class, along with Charlie, would be working with them on crafting different, you know, this would be proposal A, this would be proposal B, and we as a board, you know, would look at it and then, you know, take that and then, you know, probably, you know, ultimately vote on it.
Right.
I think that it would be one of the things that we'd want to make sure that we would have inclusivity in the student perspective, and having someone, you know, popular be elected, then maybe that would, you know, so I think that making sure that we have hearing from a variety of students from different backgrounds, I think that would really add to the conversation, and that maybe that's something we could, you know, say we would love to make sure that we're having an intentional inclusion in some way, and they can, and as part of the criteria.
To rotate, maybe?
Yeah, rotate,
you
or
know.
like maybe hear from different students, because having, for example, if you have one person that's going to be there the whole time, that would be one student's perspective. So I think that it'd be great to hear what they do, but I think it's also like, for us, if we would like to have some criteria like that, intentional inclusion or something like that, we can give them some guidelines of some of the things we'll be looking at in the proposal.
You know, one of the things I did when we had our initial meeting with student leadership is to make it clear that this is not, even though they are student leadership, and one of the tasks of them being on student leadership is they represent the entire student population of that building. And that whatever proposal they come to is a proposal not just based on student leadership, it's based on feedback they're getting from, you know, from different groups, and to be inclusive as well. But anything that we have as a board to feed to them as they're going through this, yeah, we should, you know, we would feed it via Charlie and their teacher leaders that are working with them to make sure that they're including in their proposal.
I think it's very important that the role of this group or these students, if we go forward with this, be very clearly defined. And we spent our last meeting talking about what is the role of the board. And there are certain things that pursuant to state statute are the things that the board is supposed to be looking at in terms of evaluating superintendent, setting policy for the district, overseeing you know, the financial stewardship of the district. Within the school, they have the student leadership organization relative to issues within the school. You know, they then report to the administration, to Charlie and his team. The function, it seems to me, of these students or this group, if we go forward with it, should directly relate to our function as the school board, and should not take away from student leadership if there's a problem within the school or an issue that's school related, going directly to the school administration, and if need be to the district administration, rather than bypassing all that and coming directly here. On the other hand, if they're talking about an issue that relates to policy, finances, or evaluation of the superintendent, that's where they should be coming to us. But we have to be careful that we don't mix the two. And I think it's very careful that we do that. That's number one. Second, pursuant to state statute, we're elected to serve the community, and we have certain roles. And I think we have to be a little careful, and we do this eyes wide open, and it sounds like a wonderful idea, and having student voice is outstanding. But how we go about that we don't violate, you know, what we were elected to do in terms of being the stewards of the district, and abdicate that to somebody who is not elected. I don't know that would be prudent. Nice to have advisors, nice to hear from people, but I don't think we can abdicate our role.
Yeah. As we all know, there are many roles that we have as school board members. There are formal meetings that happen in this room. There are study sessions, there are closed sessions, there are committee meetings. As we go through and evaluate these proposals, we have to look to see what participation the student leadership would have in various types of meetings. So, you know, obviously the public knows about the ones that are done in front of the camera, but there are a number of other meetings that are public meetings, and some are actually closed meetings. So I don't know whether that's been thought through or not, but it's something to consider over the next few months.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you guys say is we just have to be very clear and define our parameters absolutely, so that there's no confusion, no disappointment, no mixed messages. You know, you're going to go to this meeting, but not that meeting. You know, you're not expected to come to a meeting that happens at 9 in the morning, go to class, all of that.
But I think we should, if we're going to possibly go forward with this, we should have a discussion first amongst us and come to a consensus at a public meeting relative to what we would want this group of these students to do, and then let them come back to us with a proposal that fits within those guidelines. Because if we say to them, come to us with what you guys think, and it doesn't match what it really needs to be to fit within the state law here, I think there could be some tremendous disappointment that would be unfair to them, you know, especially after whatever efforts they would go through.
Well,
So,
my understanding is that they're sort of in the process of coming up with some ideas, but maybe before they get too far along the process of doing that, we can give them some guidelines as to, you know, the parameters that you talked about, because I would hate for them to do a lot of work on a proposal and have that proposal, you know, half of it be things that we can't either statutorily or just by our own consensus, things that we don't feel are appropriate for students to do. So maybe before they start coming with a proposal, we can come up with some guidelines to kind of steer them in the right direction.
And as Paul said, MASB, I went on there and I haven't looked at it in detail, but there's a pretty extensive document that goes through how different school districts, certainly in the state, have done this, and there are varying degrees.
With students, Howard?
With students, with student involvement. So maybe we could look at that document, pass it around, and look at the different variations on the theme and see which one, and then have a discussion in terms of, you know, version A, version B, C, D, which ones we sort of are comfortable with.
Yeah, in engineering, we call that the design space.
Yeah.
So we're going to provide them the design space, and then they can come up with the design within that space.
I mean, it seems that we all seem to be in favor of some version of this going forward, but I think going back to our last meeting, just to put some things in perspective, I think before whatever was rolled out to student leadership and however it was potentially rolled out, this concept was rolled out to student leadership, it should have come to this table first. And this table should have said, yeah, this is something we're interested in, no, this is not something we're interested in. And then, if we were interested, it should have been rolled out to student leadership.
I didn't know it was even rolled out to student leadership.
Well, I'm hearing that students are talking about it.
I was hearing it had
It was discussed with student leadership if they thought it was a good idea, and they know they have not done anything yet. They know we're having this meeting.
Right. Well, my point is, before whoever went to student leadership and had that discussion, it should have come to this table first, the way we discussed last time. And we set our priorities here and then go back. And it sounds like this may get unanimous support, and that's great. But I think for purposes of this board operating as a team, things should come to this board, we should talk about it, and then it should go out to whoever rather than start wherever and then come back to us for further discussion.
I think this is really at a very early stage, so I think on both sides, both on the student side and the board side, we're in the exploratory stage, so I don't think we've gone too far, and we can sort of mutually work to see whether there's something that could be done, and then we'll meet somewhere in the middle.
And I guess my point is, I don't think it should have gone out to the exploratory stage with student leadership till it came here first. So that's my perspective.
I think, I don't know how far it got in the exploratory stage with student leadership. I didn't know that it had been discussed in detail. I guess I thought that it was sort of, you know, is this something that students would even be interested in doing? And if so, is it possible, like Jennifer mentioned, obviously they can't be at a 9 o'clock meeting, obviously they can't be in a closed session meeting, but is it something where the bulk or some of the functions that we have, what role would are they even interested? I mean, I can't envision a student taking on a role just from the time, the amount of time it would take. Maybe it is a shared role, I don't know. But I think that if it was just sort of like putting a feeler out, is it something that's even doable? that's different than being in the exploratory stage. I knew about that, by the way, I just didn't realize that, you know, more efforts have been done. If it's an exploratory thing, yes, it should come to the board.
Yeah, I'm seeing that they're just trial balloons.
It's probably a miscommunication, so yes, the intention was, in terms of my discussion with student leadership, is it something, you know, from your perspective, being the leaders of the building, that you'd be interested in? And they have done nothing until this board agrees as a whole that it's a good idea. So they have not done any work on that. So if that was, you know, fusion, you know, I apologize for that. But they're excited about it, and they're waiting on our feedback.
Right. So we don't hold it up, though, Paul. What would we need to have to decide on tonight so that they can?
I think the next steps is if we as a board agree that you know, we put a motion that we could start exploratory, meaning, you know, they can, you know, start doing some work with their admin, while at the same time, you know, we're working on putting together parameters that we make clear that we're going to give that to them. You know, so this can kind of, you know, start moving forward, and they can get a presentation to us in April.
I think we should define our expectations first, and then go to them, rather than them having working on it first or working on it in parallel, so we don't potentially create disappointment. I would hate for there to be a great vision, great excitement, but it not be consistent with the mission and the statutory responsibilities of this board, and, you know, that they think maybe it's the sounding board for what's wrong within the high school, which that would be student leadership's role, to go to the principal and report to the principal or to the administration, and eventually make it to the school board, potentially. But it wouldn't start with the school board, and I would hate for them to think this is just going to bypass that.
Can we put that on the agenda for the next meeting?
No, I mean, we can maybe do it now. Is this something that's going to take a long time to discuss?
I would want more information.
Let's do some research. Do we all do it? Do we delegate it to one person?
I think we probably, maybe we have a committee that can work on this. So, and then solicit information from the rest of the board in terms of, you know, I mean, there's two things. One is, the one thing that I'm hearing that most of us want to build the parameters is what they're going to be doing. What they can be doing is the process, the selection process. That there's a lot of stuff that's out there, what different districts have done in terms of selecting the board, you know, the board member. And then part two is what I'm hearing is that we want to outline for them sort of guidelines so they don't get confused on what they will be doing. So there's kind of two, you know, so they can do part one, like in terms of outlining what the process would be in terms of, you know, interviewing, this selection process, and then we could work on giving them guidelines, and they shouldn't do any work until they hear back from us in terms of what they will be doing.
I think it's good to have the process written down, though, because, you know, as faculty member myself, students can be disappointed if you don't have it really very transparent. And so actually writing out, this is the process that we're going to go through and how the decision is going to be made. Because, for example, if they think it's a vote and it's not a vote, you know, then people get disappointed. I think it needs to be really, really transparent. So it's a positive experience. And I don't think there's a rush. So I think if we could write out the process and also get the criteria, I think that in the long run, we'll have a much more productive discussion, and we'll have, you know, everyone feeling good about the outcome.
And I think you have an excellent idea. Let's, right now, determine a committee. That committee then goes and hashes out both our piece, which is the what's, and the how's on their side. And if we want to dictate more of the how's, like Jackie was saying, that's fine. I mean, we're the board, so we can sort of set those parameters. But I think the first step from out of this meeting would be setting up the committee.
Okay. All right.
I mean, to the extent that we think it's appropriate, it's a valuable exercise for them to have to do research as to how it could take shape. But I agree with both of you completely. We don't want them to just be off in a place where it gets too far along, and then we have to say, no, you can't do that.
Why don't we have our study session or committee report before they take their next step, so that we don't create the possibility of disappointment.
And quite frankly, really to Mark's point earlier, just like new school board members, they need to be shown or told what the responsibilities of the school board member is, so that they know when they're coming in exactly what what they're getting themselves into. And it might not be as fully functional as what a elected school board member is. It might be a little bit more, it won't be more expansive, but it might be a little less expansive. We'll have to decide that. But MASB has the get on board material that they can start with, and then also with that also additional information of what the different variations on the theme are in terms of student representation.
Okay. Do we have an idea of how long it would take a committee to do enough research that they could bring it back and we could discuss it?
Well, maybe the committee should meet and kind of look at what data is out there and get a sense amongst the committee, and then report back, this is going to take a month, this is going to take 3 months, or this is something we should be talking about in December, considering all the other things, September, I meant to say.
Yeah, so a process and a timeline.
We're
Yeah.
working on
And
other things that
criteria.
require more immediate attention. Not that this isn't important, but there's a lot of other things we're working on based on this year's goals.
In a sense, I like Paul's timeline, or close there too, in terms of the school year. We can maybe get the parameters laid out over the next 3 to 4 months, whereby in September, when the new kids matriculate into seniors, juniors, et cetera, that we can start rock and rolling for the 2019-20 school year.
And they can always come watch board meetings, they can ask questions of us before,
That can be part
after,
of
they
their
can see,
research.
yeah, they
I
can
mean,
just see.
But
what
the timing might be,
what.
I was just
We
thinking the
can't have
timing might be
somebody-
perfect.
We can't have students be involved in this research or in this committee.
No, they can
No.
come to the board meeting.
No. She means just to attend any.
Yeah,
any
so that
student.
they'll
course.
know sort
It's
of
a
what they're
public
signing
meeting.
up for.
Not the subcommittee.
No.
Or the task force, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think that, again, the timing between here we are in February, over the next 3, 4, 5 months, by the time we get to June, if we can get both sides, both the students and the board, sort of in sync, administration can work on the process over the summer and kick it off in September.
The timeline, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so Paul, I just wanted to get a sense, like, that is consistent, the timeline with what you looked at in Philadelphia. I mean, I'm afraid of, I know we can't set a concrete timeline, but I'm also afraid of having no timeline and no committee set up, because it's, everyone to get lost.
And that's what I was just doing, kind of doing trouble.
Like, when do you
That's wrong.
foresee, what's reasonable?
I foresee the timeline would be, we'd probably wrap up the research probably in May, June.
Okay.
And then the process, what Philadelphia did is they they had interviews over the summer.
There you go.
And then they instituted in September. So, so that would be envision if I was part of the committee, that we kind of, first thing the committee would do was map out the timeline.
Okay.
So that would be the first task of the committee.
So there would be a motion at the next board meeting to form this committee?
Can we do it right now?
You can do a motion right now to form the
Yeah.
committee.
All right, I move that the Bloomfield Health Board of Education set up a committee to study.
No, you can do that in a study session.
Oh, of course you
Can we?
can, sir. In a study session, it's just the same as a break.
Can I
Just
do-
asking the question.
Yeah.
It's not-
Well, you know
it's
what,
not-
let's do
there's
it
not a-
now, and I'll do it again
We
Thursday.
haven't
if
done
have
it in
to.
the past.
I don't have any opposition, but we haven't done it in the past, and I want to
We
make
have
sure.
an
we're
expert on
good
First
ground.
Amendment law that might be able to help us here.
We don't have that posted as a motion,
We do.
as a decision-making item.
Yeah, that's
so
the thing,
we
is
just
it's
wanna be
not
careful.
listed on the agenda as a motion, that's the only part that
But
worries
you
me a
can-
little bit, but we can make it, we can always make a
Are we
motion.
gonna do an actual,
Just to set the committee.
my understanding is that you can form a task force, right, of 3 people.
Well, we
If
could-
it's not a quorum.
I could
You
form it
can-
without
the
a
president
motion.
can
Right,
do
as the
that,
president,
as
you were the
Robert's
superintendent, could
Rules
create a
of
committee.
Order, and then you
Without
task
even a
them,
motion.
you charge them.
Do it more informally.
Yeah, so I could do it
Okay.
informally, I'll form a
I
task
think that
force.
Cynthia actually took the class, so I think that I would recommend her to be on that task force, because she took the class.
Thank you for bringing that up. I wanted to mention that Cynthia has a great deal of training on this from MASB.
And she's in a class
is
today, I
highly
think, so
engaged
that's why she couldn't be here.
in this topic and would like to be considered for any committee you might have. I
Oh,
think.
yeah.
I can't speak for her, but I get that sense.
All right, so then we'll just leave it that,
To delegate to these two
that
gentlemen.
an ad hoc committee, I guess, for
Mhm.
lack of another word,
Yeah.
will be set up to do this, and it doesn't need to be put to a motion, right?
Yep, I'll do that, okay.
All right.
So next is, on the agenda is future Board of Ed meeting format and schedule discussion. So with 2 new board members joining, the discussion would be about, in the past, our format was we would have a study session, then we would have a board meeting straight, and then the discussion around that would be, do we want to separate those out? Just because in the past there was some feeling that maybe some of the topics that we wanted to discuss in the study session, we got condensed in time. So do we want to kind of spread out those meetings instead of having the 2 meetings back to back, have them separated out, so if necessary we have more time to discuss some of the topics that we want to discuss in study session. So that's to that, and now I'll leave it up to my colleagues to have a discussion on that.
I prefer the Thursday at 5 going right into the board meeting. I will say, and I sent an email to you and Rob earlier today, I don't know if either of you have seen it, but scheduling what I will friendly call last-minute study sessions is very, very difficult for me. It's very easy to look at the calendar, know when the board meetings are, and if, hey, we had a study session at 5, we're scheduled to start at 7, my secretary usually leaves things off my calendar knowing that there's always been a study session. But to start putting things on at Monday at 5 or Tuesday at 5, especially on less than 2 weeks' notice, is nearly impossible for me.
Well, my understanding, I mean, it's been hard, I think it's lately been hard for all of us with the changes because they haven't been, but I think going forward, you know, from now through June and throughout the summer and into next year, with the idea being that we'll have it well in advance. I mean, lately it's been tough, I think, you know, for anyone to schedule things sort of more last minute, but I think the intention is, you know, to make it as regular as it's been.
And I think I did, and Cynthia's not here, she sent me an email, expressed as, I know Oakland has some legislative meetings on Wednesdays that we need to factor in, and I think the idea would be we would look at our calendar and factor in, you know, a lot of things that are going on and try best we can. The idea would be to split up those meetings so they're not back to back, and then work through people's calendars.
Is there any reason not to do just alternating Thursdays, so that it would still be on Thursdays, and then because I think like people might have scheduled vacations around when the meetings are, and
that's a good idea.
Yeah, you know what I mean. If we could just stick to Thursdays, then at least we know. Okay, this week's a study session. This week's a board meeting. I think that would be doable. But I really believe that even you know, staff even who are coming, they might have scheduled things around this.
I totally agree that predictability and knowing what's coming down the pike and not adding things at the last minute, unless in case of emergency, obviously, definitely to Mark's point, I think is a good idea. But what Paul is saying, and other school districts have done this, they've got regularly scheduled meetings, but it's either a study session only, or it's a formal meeting only. And I think it does two things. Not only does it eliminate the issue that we have where it's 5 of 7 and we're feeling rushed and we're out of time, but also I know Trustee Bank has expressed numerous times about the duplicity of presentations. And if we can work towards, and even we can do some more research, Dr. Glass, possibly in looking at this, but I don't think there's anything in the law that precludes us from actually making motions and decisions in a study session. So that we've had a practice of doing that where we don't make motions and don't approve anything, but they're public meetings, and in any public meeting, you can make motions and you can approve things as long as you have a majority of the board present.
Now that you bring it up, Howard, I'm actually having a hard time figuring out the difference between a study session and a meeting.
And then retreats also. I mean, you've got these three levels
They're all
of meetings.
subject to the Open Meetings Act.
Exactly.
So the same rules apply to all of them.
Precisely.
I don't really see the
And really in the law, and Councilor Bank can maybe research this for us, but in the law, I don't think there is a word of a general meeting, study session, and retreat. That's kind of a manifestation and a history of not only this district, but districts around the state, but I don't think that's in the law.
I was saying earlier, I think study session is a little bit of a misnomer too, because it is a meeting, just like any other meeting. I think study session almost deters the public from thinking that they can attend, and it's their right to attend any meeting. I think the name study session sort of implies public, not for the public.
And I'd like to rewind the conversation about 8 years to a meeting that occurred in this room, in this exact space, in this exact configuration, which I love. Because I have said for years that board meetings are not newscasts. It's not Mort Krim and Harlan Carlin sitting up there and speaking out to a camera and empty audience. It is a meeting of us, and I would be all in favor of us staying at this table or reconfiguring this table there so it's more convenient for these gentlemen. However, but it's a meeting amongst us. It's not a show, and it's a lot easier to have a conversation around the table like this than it is up there when you can't see everybody. Whether it's televised or not, that doesn't make a difference to me. But I like even a round table would be nice.
Yeah, we tried before. We tried different configurations, and I think that's a really good idea because it is just a meeting, and it isn't broadcast. So then we can look at each other instead of looking out.
Well, then I want to say too, maybe it ought to be.
It should, yeah.
Maybe we ought to at least consider
we're on your side.
broadcasting. No, I'm saying maybe we ought to broadcast what we now call study sessions. So tonight, we would have the same broadcast and distribution channel that we use for our meetings. Why would we not do that?
That's fine. Maybe the other thing to consider is the actual level of board business, things that we're voting on, probably could be done at a once-a-month meeting. So maybe to do the board business on the first Thursday of the month, study session on the third Thursday of the month, and do it that way. Again, I'm not sure what the distinction is at the end of the day, but there's no point in having the same discussion twice. I think it's frankly been embarrassing for the board over the years that we would have these great in-depth conversations at study sessions. We would go over things, huge issues, we would look at a lot of detail, go over it ad nauseum, and really spend a lot of time thinking about things, going over things, talking about things. And then we come into the boardroom and somebody comes up and puts on a PowerPoint, same one we've seen before in any discussion, and everybody would look around and go, and we'd all sit there like a bunch of fools. I don't have to have the same conversation with you that I said a couple minutes ago just because there's a camera in the room.
Yeah.
So we can do it once.
But at the same time, we need to, as we go through that thought process, some of our meetings, or some of the agenda items on our meetings, we have student staff recognition.
That's different.
Well, okay,
I'm
just saying
sit
we
on
can,
one side of the table for that.
And we have a whole committee that's looking into that right now, right?
Well, we can talk about it, but we have reports of the president. We have superintendent's report. There are other pieces, there are announcements of different events that are going on in the district. We need to think about if it's just a pure business meeting. We know, because we are very involved and we see things going on in the district all the time, we don't have to know those things because we see them all the time. So the meetings, at least the way this district has run their meetings historically, as long as I've been involved for 8 years or so, is, you're right, it should not be a pure broadcast, but at the same time, there is information that we're trying to convey to the public, which they really are not aware of.
But I'll rewind the same 8 years. There was never previously a superintendent's report, and what we talked about 8 years ago, matter of fact, we restructured the meetings, and public comment used to be at the beginning, was moved to the end, and it was somewhat intentional so the public could hear the meeting, and then if somebody wanted to comment on the meeting, they could comment on it rather than coming in, not knowing anything about what we were discussing. But also, at that point, we created this superintendent's report as an opportunity for Rob to report to us. If everybody else happens to be listening, everybody else wants to attend, that's great. But it wasn't his report to the public. It wasn't the State of the Union kind of presentation. It was to us, hey guys, this is what's been going on. And he should be able to sit around this round table and lean over and say, here's what's going on. And frankly, whether there's cameras or not, the conversation should be this informal and this thoughtful.
Right.
So.
And I think we have to let our needs as a board drive the choice that we make in terms of what kind of meetings we have. Because the first and foremost, we have to get business done. And if that needs to be twice a month, without repeating things and being more productive, then so be it. The rest of it that's added for whatever reason, I think we should look at it with the lens of what's the best way for us to get business that we need to get done? And
So,
then let that drive this.
To that point, just a small point, to your point, having the cameras in the broadcast in the quote study sessions would probably obviate the need for repeating a presentation by a member of the administration, because as I understand it, that was reduplicated from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock for the transparency for the public, so that everybody could, so that the community could be involved and not feel like we were making decisions behind closed doors. So if the broadcast was just, every meeting was the same in terms of broadcast, then we'd only have to go through that process once instead of twice.
And you know, getting to the point, so I like, I don't know, Mark, if this is your suggestion, that all of our meetings are around the table like this, as opposed to like this, which is, you know, I'm fine if we all, you know, we'll agree with that. I think that's a great idea. And then I know I discussed, you know, with Rob on, you know, and I know me and Mark discussed about this, presentations itself, like in terms of, it is a business meeting. So I look at if you know, we're going to be discussing budget or anything, is more so as, you know, this is kind of where we are. You know, this is what I need for the board to do, or a question for the board, as opposed to, you know, any sort of background history can kind of, you know, be posted or released out there, so we could have more of a discussion like a board business meeting. Is that what you're referring to, like 8 years ago?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I think it's helpful when we're doing the mid-year budget review and Tina comes in and, you know, does her presentation. I think that's always very helpful. But she, for her benefit and for our benefit, I don't think she needs to do it at the study session and then 2 hours later come back and do an abbreviated version of it for on camera, where it looks like all she did was the abbreviated version on camera, and that we sat here and went, you know, like we weren't paying attention, despite the fact that there was 2 hour very engaged conversation in a different room.
Yeah. And quite frankly, sometimes that discussion is really what the public should be seeing, more so than even the presentation by itself. They should see they should be privy to that. And I know that they can come watch it, but for, you know, the vast majority that can't, you know, videoing it and having it out there, I think would be a good idea. And then that clears up the transparency issue as well, so we don't have to duplicate.
Howard? Yeah. A few comments on what I've been hearing. One, in terms of public comment, Mark, different organizations, municipalities, or school boards do public comment differently. You're not restricted to only one public comment period. You can do it at the beginning, middle, end. You can do 2 or 3 public comments. Sometimes they do public comment for every single issue that comes up at the board. They ask for public comment. So there are lots of ways to skin that cat, number one. Number two, I think it's, in terms of doing multiple or videoing and broadcasting different meetings like study sessions, we also have to make sure that Dr. Glass is comfortable with not the transparency piece of it, but administratively. I mean, that means we have an administrative staff that's going to be in the control room and having to, you know, sometimes it's 1 or 2 people there with a staff of kids, of students, 2 or 3. So administratively, Vicki needs to buy into this, and there might be overtime getting into that. So that's something that Rob needs to get back to us to think about. And then third, I think in terms of expediting meetings, Mark, you're right on point. And I think one thing that we can have done is presenting or giving us the PowerPoint presentations well in advance. I mean, we have an agenda meeting a week earlier, and then usually on Wednesday, or Tuesday or Wednesday, and then we get the agenda on Friday. But very often, the PowerPoint presentations that are actually presented at the meeting, we don't get either until that day, or sometimes we don't get it all, and we only see it visually. So that would be a wonderful thing if Rob can anticipate what's going to be coming and put the PowerPoints in the agenda when we see it, so that it's there, so we can review those, ask any questions about the PowerPoint slides that are there, and therefore have as much preparation as possible. That's our job, is to do the homework ahead of time and not being seeing things the first time at the board meeting.
Yes and no. I agree with what you said entirely. but there's also something that's bothered me in the past that I might as well talk about. So administration comes in, and they've done all their due diligence, done all their homework, they have presentations made, and then we have these really fancy PowerPoint presentations. And I'm guessing sometimes it takes people 3, 4, 5 hours maybe just to make the PowerPoint for it. And maybe sometimes we don't always need the PowerPoint. Whatever presentation they have, they can do, and they can use those other 4 or 5 hours to do something else rather than make it look nice and spiffy for us, because we're all pretty quick studies, and we can cut them a little bit. I don't think cutting them slack is not even the right term. It's just allow them to use their time for other things.
And I'll agree with that. We don't need a PowerPoint specifically, but we do need the information.
Yeah.
We don't want to see the information, whether it's a PowerPoint or a Word document or anything, at the meeting.
Right, but
That's all, because it's up to us to do the homework ahead of time.
And I think that there's one kind of process issue, I am a kind of a process person here, is that if you make the agenda, it's hard to have the PowerPoint at the agenda meeting, because the agenda meeting is where you're saying, this is what I want to see.
Oh, yeah, oh, no, I'm not
So
at the agenda
first you
meeting.
have the agenda meeting, and then they have time to create whatever it is, their
When
material.
it's published by Leanne to us.
Yeah, so then it's not 2 weeks before, but it will be maybe a week before, right?
As
So that
much
they
in-
have time
as
to
much
put
in
together.
advance would be
And if we need to pull the agenda meeting a little earlier to give more lead time for Rob and the
Yeah.
administration, okay.
And
Yeah.
I
Can be done.
think too, you know, if there's something that's particularly useful to us, we can make the recommendation that it be put in some kind of form, maybe not a PowerPoint, that can be shared with the public in a format that's easier to read or easier to watch than the notes that we get. I mean, not that they're not going to see it that way, but then maybe we think it's a really good point that we could develop further. So, I mean, not to get rid of all PowerPoints altogether, but maybe we could be selective, and after we've seen it, something that's, you know, that would be something that would be better shared with the PowerPoint.
So I'll summarize, and we'll have in the minutes sort of this discussion, and then, you know, we'll send it out, you know, to the board. The only other thing on this I wanted to discuss as a group is we have these two committees, the instructional committee and the finance and facilities committee. Right now, and discussions, you know, had is whether or not we should make these committees open to all board members that would like to attend. So that you know, the idea that was presented to me is right now we have 3 people assigned to the instructional committee, 3 people assigned to the finance and facilities committee, and because of the Open Meetings Act, you know, it's only limited to 3, and no other board members could attend. The question to the group here is, should we just have both those meetings posted and open, with the idea is still you have the 3 main participants, and any other board member could, if they would like, to attend those meetings and be a silent participant, and neither of those meetings, and we would have to, you know, work it through our bylaws, would be voting meetings, but anyone, if they would like to, could attend those meetings and make those meetings, you know, open to all board members. So I'll leave that up there for discussion.
Can I ask a question though? I just want to be clear. Are the 2 standing committees, the only 2 standing committees we have are the board instructional committee and finance, legal, and legal.
Finance, facility, legal affairs.
Okay.
2 standing
So,
committees.
but we already post the agendas for those, and we already open those to the
Yes.
public?
That's
Yes.
correct.
All right, so what practical difference would there be?
The practical difference would be, we could, unless we build into the, you know, we'd have to have discussion, is that we could, if everyone came to the meeting, we could vote on things at the meeting. Right now, since there's only 3, we don't. We can't. We don't have a quorum. So that would be the only
Oh, all right,
practical.
and, well, the other practical difference is, I'm sorry, it just started to make sense to me, but if a 4th board member wanted to attend, as the public does, we've restricted that in the past.
In the last 6 months. It's only been in the last 6 months
all
that
right.
we've done this.
So
Or
once
maybe
we,
9 months.
if we're in compliance with the Open Meeting Act in terms of posting the agenda and posting the minutes thereafter, then the only practical difference is just voting and letting another board member or more than one other board member attend if they want.
We did have an opinion coming from our lawyers, and really the only difference from what historically had been done for years and what we've done since the spring of this year, 2018, would be that we would change the wording on the notification of the meeting.
Oh, okay.
That's purely it, that we would say, and I think the lawyer is saying, you know, the board can give notice to the public that any committee meeting at which a fourth board member sits silently in the audience, it's considered a special meeting of the board because a quorum of the board is present. So all this would mean would be Leanne, Rob, would need to change the titling on the heading of the BIC or FFLA meeting. And otherwise, and
Okay.
with that change in just labeling, we can go back to the exact way we were doing it previously.
I would be very much opposed to changing the format, particularly to a format where there would be potentially voting at this committee level, because generally these committees, while they may meet once a month, tend to meet during the day. And now it creates a situation where if I'm on FFLA, I better go to that BIC meeting also, because there could be a vote that takes place there.
Yeah.
And frankly, being on the board is a large time commitment as it is. We all do this as volunteers, but to now create more meetings where votes are going to be at, and there's also even FFLA. I mean, I'm the chairman. Next Thursday, we have a meeting. We're either going to need to move it, or somebody will sit in for me because I'm going to be in New York next Thursday. But you know, we're talking about really rearranging work schedules, and a lot of us have commitments, until 5 o'clock.
It gets to be almost like a stealth, in a way that if you're not really predictable, then you don't know if there's going to be a vote or not.
Well,
then
I think we can resolve this pretty quickly.
Let me ask, how
Yeah,
realistic? What's been the history? Has there ever been a vote in one of these committee meetings? And how realistic is it? Or under what conditions might that even happen?
So the history of this was that in the past, it would be the 3 standing committees, and it would be the 2 standing committees of 3
people.
And then if either the board president or any other board member wanted to go sit and be part of the public, they could, with the idea is you're public, so it wasn't, it was still 3 board members. And then myself, I know specifically, I went to a class where, this issue came up, and we got an opinion from our attorney that said that we can't do that anymore, that it's against the Open Meetings Act. So we changed it, and we limited it to just the 3 board members. So, in looking at the pros and cons, the con of this is that the people who attend a specific, let's say BIC, that the person taking the minutes would have to take really good minutes, and we would have to give a detailed report, so the other colleagues of the board, who some may want to go, would be informed, of the committee. So, the history was it was kind of open, in the past to anyone who wanted to just sit in as part of public, but now with the Open Meeting Act, we wanted to make sure.
Well, it sounds like we were always in compliance, just the title, or maybe, do they allow public comment at the?
They do allow public.
All right, so it was just really.
Yeah, the structure was very similar to a study session. Can I just make one comment?
Sure.
Yeah, to assuage Mark's concerns, as we all know, we're working on a new policy manual. We've been looking at that for about 9 months or so. As part of a policy manual, you also have something called the Board Operating Procedures, the BOP. It is very possible, either in the policy manual or in the Board Operating Procedures, that we can write in there that says that we, even though 4 board members would be present, that we do not authorize them in a committee to take a vote.
Yeah, I was
going
to just ask if that's legal.
We can limit
we can legislate ourselves.
We can legislate ourselves, and that way you wouldn't have a concern that there would be, basically it would be business as usual the way we used to do it.
Well, then why not just bring all that business at the 2 committees to the board table and not have the committees?
Yeah, I don't understand why would even.
But that's even more time though for your schedule.
I might suggest that committees as a whole, particularly when you have newer people coming to the table trying to all get up to speed, are recommended by MASB. It just makes sense, right? In addition, if you have, one of my concerns about having a meeting once a week is it's a board meeting every week. That's non-standard. That's a lot. I would be fine having because if you're having a study session, board meeting, that's atypical in my experience. Usually you would have every 2 weeks.
It
a
could,
study session and a board
I don't
meeting.
think we've said every week or bi-weekly.
No, but one of the concerns that I had is it's just a lot of time. But I also recognize that right now we need to spend a lot of time, right? It's a good investment. So, I'm thinking if you did what Mark is suggesting,
I'm not
you would
suggesting.
have.
I was just asking. I was
no, I'm going to
posing
blame it
as a
on
question.
Mark.
No.
But I am suggesting that something like that, there might be enough time to actually do that. If you wanted to hold to that once a week.
There are lots of ways to skin the cat.
I like it the way it works.
But I like that there it wouldn't be voting, so you wouldn't feel compelled to be there if you couldn't. You know that whatever was going to become policy would have to be voted on. But I think, like you said, Paul, I mean, the onus on the person taking minutes is huge because for the 4 people that don't go to the meeting, you're not going to get enough information.
You're missing a lot.
Yeah, you are.
You really are.
I mean, I only went to one so far, but Mark did a good job of, summarizing it. But we were in a meeting for over an hour, and there was a lot of stuff that was said that was couldn't have been relayed.
And if I just might add to that for a minute, I know Paul and I had this conversation about trying to sort of move to the heart of matters at times when we're doing presentations, and the background, maybe isn't as important in every situation. But I would argue, to support what you're saying, Lisa, is when you're in a meeting like a BIC, and you really, the meat of that understanding is in the process and in the background.
Yeah.
And I think creating time and space appropriately for that is a really good idea if you can find a way to do it. And so, I think if you can do more of those in the whole somehow. Also, when I look at Kevin Sutton's opinion, what we currently are doing, or what we used to do, where we would have 3 and call it an open meeting is because we have public comment, is the least recommended option by a wide margin in his recent opinion. So there were 3 options he listed, 1, 2, and 3. He said you have 3.
Right.
No, option 1 was not recommended.
Option 1's out.
He said you can, but he would highly recommend, it's probably open to more interpretation. So, in light of all that, I think I just present the fact that if we can do more somehow together, particularly I would say around the instructional components, which are complex and there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of change right now, might be good.
I think what we're talking about is if we stay with the current historic structure, we go with option 2 in Kevin's letter. But if we go with the committee of the whole, it makes the whole conversation moot. But it does mean, therefore, more obligation on board members to show up. Now you're not only going to but now you're going to a BIC and a FLA meeting every single month.
Well, wait a minute.
But it's a board meeting.
Speaking from a practical, no, I mean.
See, I'm retired.
Okay,
I don't care.
right. So let's say it's wide open. I can tell you right now, I'm not going to go to FFLA meetings. No time.
Okay.
So I am going to be traditional and rely on the board to inform me of the progress of the committee at the regular standing board meeting. I would love to sign any piece of paper about never voting at a BIC meeting. I think that's great. From a purely practical standpoint, though, it seems to fit. So here's something that just happened, right? Todd just approached Howard to work on a project with him. You're not on BIC, but wouldn't it make everything progress more quickly if some of that business, I know it's not ready to come to BIC, but when it's ready, that you're actually there and we get the work done, whether you're officially on BIC or not.
So I think, what I'm hearing is, I agree, no obligation. And we can maybe work out in our policies and in our bylaws that it's non-voting, and then we leave it we try to go to where it was in the past, but where no one's under any obligation, it's non-voting, but at the same time we're compliant with the open meeting.
And allowing board members other than the 3 to attend. The way we did before.
Yeah, just as long as it's getting to Mark's point, as long as
does anybody
there's no vote,
is this something we take a vote on, or we just vote on Thursday? This doesn't need a motion, does it?
No, I think we probably would.
We never took a vote. Put it this way, we did. You were here.
Right.
We did when we moved from the traditional process to kind of this more restrictive process. We talked about it, we never actually did a motion and voted.
Why don't we motion and vote on Thursday, so just so the public is fully aware that these 2 subcommittee meetings are open, if they've always have been open, maybe people don't know
But we gotta
that.
make it clear, like, we're still working through our policy, while make it clear, if we can't just have, you know, that it's a non-voting meeting.
Right.
So we need to make sure that that's updated, you know, we look at that as we're looking at our policies. Okay, with that, the next item on the agenda is budget. Tina?
All right, so we have the update for mid-year. And this is an update in advance few weeks from now, where I will present the recommendation, and I expect it to be very close to what I'm about to discuss. So this isn't a fancy PowerPoint. These are basically the numbers and putting it in a format that we've been using over and over again because I think it's more easily understandable this way. And so the bottom of page 1, we have the original budget and then compared to where I expect mid-year to land as of today, as we're going through all of the different accounts. Our fund balance is audited at the top, starting at $20.4 million. Revenue is down, primarily due to enrollment, and we'll look at that on the flip side in a minute. And expenditures are actually down as well, but in total, our revenue is under expenditures by about $1.3 million more than the original budget. And that would bring our fund balance still within board policy, but just under the 20%, which is a higher end of the range, to 19.7%. So now if we look at the flip side, we'll spend just a few minutes looking at the highlights. There are the largest reason for the change is enrollment, we know that. And our projection included an increase, and not only did we not have an increase, we had a decrease. So in total, that's about a $2 million hit to the budget. We've had discussion about that and continue to work internally on enrollment and what we're doing as far as families. I don't have an update for you because Sharon and I did not have a chance to connect today for tonight, but that is something that you can expect to hear more about in the updates to you.
So we're going to look into the 166 if it's families leaving the district, or if it's just that our you know, who we engaged that was lower than what was anticipated.
Kind of in adding on to what Paul's saying, can we split the 166 into what the forecasted increase was and what the realistic change was so it can be year to year?
I was waiting for a break. So when you said the 166,
guys here, come on.
we included in our projection an increase of 55 based on the enrollment projection study that was done last year. So we are digging into that, all right? And so pieces of that do include what is going on statewide with birth rates, demographics, the cohort graduating being much larger than kindergarten, just as many districts are experiencing. But then beyond that, we're looking at Bloomfield specific numbers. I don't have any more than that for tonight, but trust me, we know enrollment and the foundation for people are two biggest pieces.
So let me understand, make sure I got the math right. So the net is 166. From the budget. The variance of the budget is 166 students to FTE now.
Yes, original budget to where we're at is 166.
So there, we had a forecasted in a 55 increase. We ended up with a net 166 decrease. So therefore, year over year, we had a decrease of 221 students from 2018 fiscal to 2019 fiscal. Is that correct? Did I do the math right?
We said we'd increase by 55.
Right.
I'm going to use my hands, I'm a visual person, okay?
I hear you.
None of the 55 happened, down to 0, and we had a decrease of 111.
Oh, 111?
In the general fund.
So she's already.
So adding those together, that is.
The 166.
Yeah, original, yeah.
I got it.
Original budget.
Okay.
That's.
You know, one question I have is, when you look at that, is how many what I'm looking for, how many new families moved in, and then how many left? So is it like, you know, let's just say if the net decrease is 166.
And you're not talking about kindergarten and 12th grade, right? You're talking about real attrition by choice.
Yeah, like of the 166, how many, one question I do have is how many from last year to this year, from a district-wide, has left? So we could have had 80 families move in, and then getting to your point, 250 leave, where maybe that 55 was accurate because maybe 55, came in, but then we had over 200 leave. So that's something I'm interested in.
When will Shira be able to give us?
We'll give you a report.
Okay.
Yeah,
because we need it by grades.
We've done it, actually. I think we've given you some of this in a report at some point. We've broken it down based on, like, we know that there was a larger percentage that went to, according to the comments that we had, that went to non-publics and that sort of thing. We know that we had more graduate and fewer come in.
Yeah, I remember that.
Fewer come in, so we did
There was
go
like
into some of
between
the
21%.
We'll break that down for you in some more detail.
That
But I
was
think
private.
and we might have had some of the numbers, but we didn't necessarily have the stories that went along that Paul's
We can give you
asking
more
for.
of the stories. I know I approached it with some of you at some point, but let me give you more.
And I'm curious as to whether you have any kind of mathematical rubric, just people who move in, out, like, do you have a sense of that?
Clan Moran does a huge study year to year. We get a presentation that shows all kinds of different things, down to birth rates and projected census. And,
Okay, cool.
It's very detailed.
And then the other question, I know I raised this in a previous meeting, the ones that are leaving, are we in any way, shape, or form reaching out and setting up meetings with the people?
We're developing a process to actually do that, using our family ambassadors and others, and that'll be part of the report we get.
That was really part of what Shira was doing with the exit interview process.
What we've started to do is to gather that data as part of a more comprehensive process. And I need her to be able to give you an update on where that stands. We continue to move through that, but we can give you a more accurate process of when we could expect to have all that.
Because this is going to be really important as Paul gets ready. Here we are in February. When are we expecting Paul to do his presentation on student population changes for the next 10 years?
Having that data is extremely important to me, especially going with the final budget.
Right.
But I don't know yet. So we need to discuss with him what we need him to do this year, if it's going to change at all, because we do have Sandra. I don't have the answer.
So, because we need to feed back this information to Paul, so if he has to modify or adjust his model, and it's February, he normally comes in March or April. I mean, the timing is getting close.
Paul from Clan Moran.
Paul Wills, yeah, he's from Clan Moran. He's a parent in the district, and also he does this all around the state, and he gives us a very extensive report that shows, as Nick was saying, the forecast projection of what our student populations are by building, by age group, out, so that we can handle capacity issues, business, budgeting issues, all these things.
Any more questions on the budget?
Well, did we go to the last?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
the
I
last
only got
slide?
through one line.
I'm kind of stuck in
At least on that aspect of the budget.
I'll make it really quick. All right, you can read. I'm not going to read to you, but the huge piece of our spending is staffing. So I have staffing decreases and increases. Overall, we saved money. So absent this enrollment decline, we actually have continued to make efforts, budget balancing actions and otherwise, that have been very positive. So this is one of them. There's something in there on the retirement cost, which is a little bit detailed, but there was a House bill that we were very concerned was going to pass in lame duck. It did not. That helped. That would have been more costly on the contributions districts would make. So that's a piece of it because we were anticipating that might happen and it didn't, thank goodness. We did have some increases in staffing with speech therapists, social workers, so that's important. We've restructured the farm a lot, and the good news that I'm sharing with you there on the bottom slide, you'll see an increase in farm program revenue. So the camps and different things that Alan's doing over there with his entire team, it's a team effort, is going very well. Other than that, a positive with the economy and some interest rate increases, we felt comfortable increasing our budgeted interest income by about $160,000. We're very
interest rate increases. That's a
yeah,
non-sequitur over the last 10 years.
I know. I couldn't believe it when I saw the email. So that's the $2.2 million, and that is my update.
Is the idea, like for 2.2, is the idea, is this, as of now, are we looking at more potential cuts to get that lower? I mean, what's the vision?
Well, we'd like to. If we have an opportunity through attrition, we're continuously looking at that, right? The other opportunities are pretty small. When I look at the change like supplies, things that are not people, it is very minuscule. But we are working with the principals and deciding whether we're going to shave some of that off depending on where they're at, but we never want to do anything that impacts the needs that we have in our buildings in classrooms. And that's small. Yeah, in mid-year. So we will do what we can. The things that are up in the air that our system doesn't yet do exactly what I envisioned it would do is projecting our hourly and some of the stipend work that a lot of our staff do, whether it's coaching, et cetera. Some of those things don't come in as consistent, and so we're conservative and typically have been fortunate that that's come in a little better. We have about $300,000 budgeted in severance and different people retiring, like payments such as that may or may not come to fruition, so that's up in there. So it might be better, it's conservative, but right now this is where it's on.
Question? Tina, I'm just wondering, the enrollment change is 166. Does that, does that impact only this year, or does that have impact in future years in our 5-year forecast?
Right, so the report that I used as far as enrollment projections last year had some other increases in it. Now we're working closely with Sandra doing a deeper dive, so she's going to be very involved in how we do this going forward with Paul. I would say yes, because right now I've put any planned increases on hold until we're digging in internally here. And Sandra is that good, so I have a lot of confidence with her.
Because you talked about our red, yellow, green kind of indication in the board policy, and you highlighted the 19.7%, but that's only for 1 year, and as we go into the future, you're saying that it might have, the $2 million might have impact in 2020, 2021, 2022.
Yes, and so this is a
which could possibly get us into that yellow range, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I consider anything over 20 yellow.
Okay.
And then we'll be discussing it, but it feels like we discuss it all the time anyway.
Into the red phase, I'm sorry,
yeah,
you're right.
We do discuss it all. Yeah, so what happens with the forecast, remember, it has the most clarity the first 1 and 2 years out. And then beyond that, it's much less clear what will happen. Primarily on the revenue side, because it's the per pupil, and I can't predict what Lansing's going to do, as well as our enrollment. So we're doing everything we can, really digging into a lot of what we've been discussing on the enrollment side. We obviously are very involved and watch Lansing as much as possible, but I will be very conservative on those out years. So I might say a $25 increase, but yet this year we had 120. So that is, so expect it to look worse. I'm hoping that we won't go under 15, but it all depends. Big bargaining unit.
And you're right, so the next year, 2 big variables. One is we have a new contract, but as we know, there's a new administration in Lansing. And we will see there's a State of the State address coming next Tuesday, and the governor will roll out a new budget the first or second week of March. We'll have to see how that all looks. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion in the last few years. As a matter of fact, there was just a report that was issued last week, or 2 weeks ago, excuse me, out of Michigan State University.
Yes.
With Dr. David Arson, who I think some of us know, about school funding. So we'll have to keep an eye on that and see how that will impact, at the state level, but also for our district.
Anything else on the budget? Okay, I have a motion to go into closed session now. Motion for
let's
adjournment.
adjourn first.
That's a motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn. Second.
Well, okay.
I get a motion to go into closed session.
Motion for closed session.
Second.
Jennifer, is ready to go into closed session?
Yes.
We have to do a roll call.
Yes.
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 Motion passes to go into closed session.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Can we have a thank you?
Stand up and take all my photos. I'm never, not guessing around, just.
Oh, no, you didn't, no, you wouldn't have known.
Yeah, she said my university, so it's
I started her new job today.
yeah.
Are we meeting in my mom?
No, meeting.
Oh, we are, okay.
stated earlier.
Right. So she's been waiting. But thank you.